as Andrew was saying, there's quite a body of work building up with holographic breathing, and up until this point, that's just been inside me, and I would teach it, and it would kind of disappear in a way. And I mean, there's just a huge body of work that I've taught in the past and I've understood inside, and I teach it or I practice it myself, and then I'll move on to the next bit, and the bit I was doing before just goes on to the back burner. It's still happening inside me, it's still integrating inside me, and then maybe 6 months later that comes back up to the surface to be reworked again. And with these, because I'm recording them, then people can practice them. But I just was tuning in today, and I just had the feeling it was getting to a point where people may not really understand, or may start feeling, oh, there's too much information, you know, like mainly from what I can see in the breathwork world, people will do a particular technique, maybe breathe slowly, maybe breathe fast, maybe continuous breath, maybe focus on the out breath, maybe focus on the in breath. But to my knowledge, holographic breathing is the only study that gives a whole inner science of how the breath works, or at least how it works with holographic breathing, because the modality of holographic breathing is slightly different to, well, it is different to our normal breathing, and we'll be looking at that today. And I can understand people start thinking, well, we did this, then we did this, then we did this, and it's a lot to hold. And where is it going from here? And all I can really say is there is a lot more information, and there is a lot more information that I don't know yet, that I haven't found out about yet, or only half understand. And each one of these modules you can do as a standalone thing. But when you bring them all together, they start becoming part of a whole science, like in the same way that you would study acupuncture, or in the same way that you would study Ayurvedic medicine, or shiatsu, or osteopathy. There's a lot of material to those certain things. And with holographic breathing, at the minute I can see that people would start getting a bit confused. What is the bit I should be focusing on? Should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? What happens with this? And all I can say is, as you learn more, all the separate parts, all the separate principles start to interlink. So rather than looking like I'm teaching you lots of separate things, if you practice them, they start joining together, they start making more sense, and then as you move on, you're adding something that is already making sense. So it starts making this whole sphere, and you can see the whole sphere rather than bits of a jigsaw puzzle. So in your stance of learning it, and a lot of people here have committed to coming along either every time or most times, and and it's useful to know where to hold yourself in that. In that, at least for me, it's an in-depth science that we're learning here, and I include myself on that, because each time I teach it over the next week, a whole load of new things start bubbling up that I only half understood or didn't properly associate with before. So the journey is new for me as well. So just to allow that to be in your recognition of what you're doing here, that there is something available here that is more than is standard, really. And I know that it's a lot of information, and I know some people may feel, oh, it's very intellectual, but I have been chosen to give this work over. I mean, it's as simple as that. Nobody else is doing that. It's come to me and I'm doing it. And that is how it comes through me. I got a very good understanding of shapes and geometry and physics, how things work together. And as I watch it going through my body, I start saying, oh, this is doing this. This is how this bone works. This is how this energy relates with that energy. And the way I'm made, I'll stick with something and I'll keep letting it evolve. And it may be a fire energy is being produced from different organs, and I'll stay with that for days or sometimes weeks, and it will work through a specific circuit, and then suddenly it will move into a different circuit. It will move into a water circuit, and I think, it's changed, and now it's relating to these organs. And then I will work out ways of being able to teach that. And we haven't got to that stage yet. We haven't got to the different types of energies. We're very much working with understanding the structural side of things. So that is just the way it comes through for me, and that is what I'm doing. So I'm kind of making people aware of what is available here. You can go into this in the same way as you do a 3 or 4 year training in some kind of Ayurvedic arts or something like that. And there's not a set curriculum set out in how it's going to journey through it. You know, I did move into working with the tongue so that I could continue working with the cranium, but as we got into working with the tongue, that just kept on leading from one thing to another, and at some point I will come back to working with the cranium again. And at the minute it's very much working with the diaphragms, and today will also be the pelvic diaphragm and the genitalia and the lower organs. So I hope that's helped people a bit with what we're doing here. It's absolutely fine to pop in and out and just do separate ones. But if you do come to each one and practice a bit and listen to the recordings that go with it, I am teaching what hopefully will be a whole healing system here, because it isn't just breath work for me. I am a practicing healer. I go out and work as a healer, and while I'm doing healing, my normal breathing is holographic breathing, and the different channels I'm working with come through when I'm healing in the same way as when I'm teaching this. So it interfaces with so many different realms. But that being said, what we're going to work with today is the diaphragms, and we're going to start with the roof of the mouth and how that works. And we're going to come from a perspective of the bones in the first part. Because as is becoming very evident, when we work with the bones, then people stay quite awake and are clear with it. Then as soon as we're working with the tongue and the diaphragm, suddenly people start moving into this dream state and clearing the brain. So first we'll work with that in relationship with the jaw, so it stays in the bones. Then in the second part we will work with the tongue and the organs and how it's relating to the brain, but through the roof of the mouth, and we'll open up the dream state and how to be with that. Then from a question in the last tutorial, we will start working with the pelvic diaphragm, how that works and how it differs from when we're breathing normally. And hopefully this will give kind of a lower anchor for people to allow their holographic breathing to anchor from. To explain a bit about the working with the pelvic diaphragm, I'm going to show this in a bit more detail. So, right. Unfortunately, these are quite low. So, what I will start with is on the in-breath, the ribs are rising, and on the out-breath, the ribs are dropping. And as they rise, this creates more space inside, and at the same time the diaphragm drops, which creates more space as well. But in the ribs rising, all of the muscles between the ribs are shortening. So even though it feels like an expansion, and it is airwise, the muscles are contracting. And for the ribs to rise, they're holding somewhere, and they're holding in the throat and the neck with the muscles of the throat and neck. They're rising up, and these muscles are holding them. And those muscles are connecting to the spine, they're connecting to the jaw, and they're connecting to the underside of the cranium. So on the in-breath, all the muscles are shortening to bring the ribs up, and on the out-breath, they're all relaxing. So, now normally I just have something here to pull down to show the motion of the jaw, but now I hope people can see this. I put in two muscles now. I put in a muscle here and a muscle here, and these muscles will shorten to lift up the ribs. And as they shorten, if the jaw is relaxed, the jaw will open on the in-breath. As they shorten, the jaw will close on the out-breath. As they lengthen and the ribs drop. So on the in-breath, they're shortening to lift the ribs. They're also shortening to open the jaw. So it automatically opens the jaw if the jaw is relaxed. And then as they contract and the ribs drop, the jaw closes. So the movement of the jaw is intrinsically connected to the breath in the lungs. As the lungs are rising and these muscles are shortening, that's automatically opening the jaw on the in-breath, closing the jaw on the out-breath. So the muscles of the chest are contracting, the muscles of the throat and neck are contracting and connecting to the head. Now, that is pretty well so through the whole of the body in holographic breathing. On the in-breath, the muscles are contracting in a very subtle way, and on the out breath they're lengthening through the arms, the legs, the abdomen, the throat, the neck, the face and head, except for a couple of places. Here, these muscles, as the jaw is opening, the muscle, now I can bring this closer now, because we don't need the bottom muscles. These muscles, as the jaw opens, the muscle from the jaw up to the zygomatic arch, that's lengthening. And the muscles from the top edge of the jaw here up around this should splay out over the whole side of the cranium, is also lengthening. They both lengthen on the in-breath and both shorten on the out-breath. So some muscles are shortening as we breathe in, and other muscles are balancing that and lengthening that, and with the jaw it's these muscles here. And these muscles don't just relax, they're balancing the force in this muscle. As this tension gets more here, they gradually open, but that's building up the tension in those muscles. This one's contracting and they're lengthening, but they're not just relaxing, lengthening, they're balancing the force. So the jaw is just floating between two sets of muscles, these ones shortening and those ones lengthening. And when we move into working with the diaphragms, the pelvic diaphragm and the diaphragm under the ribs, the reason I'm showing this with the head is it's the same with the diaphragm. The diaphragm is dropping, all the muscles are tightening in the diaphragm, which is dropping the diaphragm, and at the same time the muscles of the abdomen are expanding to allow the abdomen to expand. So to properly understand the movement in the abdomen, you have to understand that the diaphragm above is dropping, and for me the diaphragm below in the pelvic diaphragm is rising. We'll look at both sides of that story when we come to it, and all of the muscles in the abdomen are expanding. So there's a contraction in one set of muscles or two sets of muscles, and then an expansion in the others to create the motion of the breath there. So just, I'll be making little props for you today. Here's my second little prop. Oops. So this is the cranium. Now with the lungs, the air can come into the lungs and they can all expand in all different ways, but the cranium and the brain is sealed. It's hard to see them. There's muscles coming down here. This is the brain, this pink balloon. Let me move it away. Now I'll put it on top of a jar, but what you would have is the spinal cord coming up and holding into the balloon. So now you have all of the muscles pulling down, and the spine is holding it or pressing up. So as these pull down, notice what happens. Breathing in, the balloon expands sideways. It shortens top to bottom. Breathing in, oh, it's shortening on one side more than the other. Okay. Let's try again. Breathing in, can you see that expanding to the sides? Breathing out. So the brain is a sealed unit. It's going to stay the same volume. So as all these muscles pull down and the spine pushes up, you have this movement. Breathing in, breathing out. So this creates that breath in the brain. It shortens top to bottom, expands out to the sides, lengthens top to bottom, contracts inwardly. So you get this, and this is how all the cells through the whole body breathe. They shorten in one direction to expand in the other direction. And this is what Sutherland talked about and was ignored for years and years, was how there's this movement within all of the cells, within the brain, within the whole central nervous system, and they relayed it within that to a spiritual energy that comes in and creates this movement. In holographic breathing, that whole movement is aligned with the breath and is activated by the breath and is activated by holographic breathing. Breathing in, breathing out. Now this is the same movement in the pelvic. You've got the pelvis here with the pelvic diaphragm underneath. You've got the diaphragm on top here under the ribs. Breathing in, breathing out. So for our abdomen to expand, it's shortening top to bottom. The whole abdomen is shrinking top to bottom and expanding. The whole abdomen is rising, lengthening top to bottom and contracting inwardly. So that's the basic how it happens, and we're going to look at in much greater detail this bottom diaphragm, the pelvic diaphragm, and how that breathes in the last session. So in the face, the jaw, see it as a hologram of the torso. The jaw relates a lot to the pelvis. The tongue relates a lot to the organs of the abdomen. The roof of the mouth is the same dome as the diaphragm. The roof of the mouth relates to the diaphragm. Nasal passageways, you see the four little ventricles relate to the heart. Maxillary sinuses relate to the lungs. So this area is the abdomen and below, the lower energies. This area is the heart and lungs and the feelings and emotional centers. The eyes and ethmoid, this is more to do with the brain and the higher energies. So the face is a hologram of the torso. And as the jaw is dropping and the hyoid bone drops, the jaw drops, the tongue is connected to the roof of the mouth with the light seal. The tongue drops. If we allow it, if we let the roof of the mouth be a mutable thing so it's soft, the roof of the mouth drops with it. The same as the diaphragm. On the in-breath, the roof of the mouth drops and widens. On the out-breath, the roof of the mouth rises and narrows. So it's the same configuration, energy and movement of the diaphragm. And as that happens, the breath, the movement of the breath is no longer just in the mouth. It rises through the roof of the mouth. The nasal passageways start breathing, the sinuses start breathing, and it opens up that whole energy system that relates to our heart and lungs. And then that carries on, when it carries on up through the eyes and the ethmoid. And the ethmoid also lights up and is the higher energies. If you start falling asleep, I don't know if you're starting to do that, just sit back and don't worry too much about the information. Just let the words go through you. It starts to awaken the brain and allow the energies to start going through the brain, and they're moving in a way that isn't to do with the intellect. So don't worry too much about the information. You're going to get the video afterwards, so you can listen to it anyway. And rather than fall asleep, let that energy just go through your brain, and you'll find out it's a change of mode in your brain that's happening. You won't have to pass out anymore. So just let that happen. Okay, good. So the whole face starts breathing, and it initiated really from this movement, breathing in, breathing out of the roof mouth, and then that spreads through the cranium, through the tentorium, which is the diaphragm in the center of the cranium, through the cranial base and down through the spine and out through the whole body. And there's a strong relationship, as in that picture, between the jaw and the pelvis, and the jaw very much relates to the sit bones and pelvis. So that is the first meditation that we're going to do. So are we all ready? Brilliant, great, good. Okay, so closing your eyes. So in this one we're going to work again with the roof of the mouth, but we're going to do it very much from the tongue, from the trachea, from the heart and lungs, from the diaphragm. And when we go from that perspective, it activates the organs, it activates the heart and lungs, and it activates the brain. When we do it from the jaw, it activates the bones of the cranium, and that was more what we were doing in the last one. So when we work with the organs and the tongue, this seems to be what activates people to go to sleep. And if you work with that state so that it actually goes through the brain, you stay awake, but you go into a different consciousness. You go into a dream state, but you're still awake. So to a certain extent, let me just, I'm going to mute everybody. To a certain extent, people are doing that all the time in holographic breathing. They are working with the jaw, but they're also working with the tongue. So this is one of the reasons people fall asleep with holographic breathing, or that people can use it for insomnia. But if you allow that energy to travel through the brain, you start becoming aware. Rather than going to sleep, you can feel it going in waves, activating the brain and the brain cells. And for me, this is used a lot in the womb when the babies, for me, the babies are breathing with holographic breathing in the womb, and it's going through the brain, and all the brain cells are activating and growing. And when the baby's on the breast, it's also activating the brain, and the brain cells can become more alive. And also, if you think about it, it's also been used since the beginnings of time. For if a baby's upset or can't sleep, then you can put the baby on the breast, and it's not just the milk that's going to make the baby sleeping. This thing that is very similar to holographic breathing puts the baby into a dream state, and it can sleep more easily at night. So it has been used for a long time for that. But when allowed to go through the brain, then it activates the brain, and you don't actually pass out. You stay awake, but you hopefully stay awake and go into a different mode. And I'm just going to, most people have seen all of these, so I'm just going to show them a bit just to get an idea. There's a picture of all the brain cells, the glial cells. This is a neuron. That's the axon coming out. These are myelinating glial cells. These are axons, these little sea anemone type things. These are microglial cells. They just swim around. They're the immune system. And then all of this is cranial fluid. It's 90% cranial fluid, and the cranial fluid is 99% water. So it's a very aqueous environment, and the bodies of the cells aren't connected closely. They're connected by tentacles with water in between. So the whole brain is a very aqueous thing. And for me, it also activates these astrocyte cells, which connect everything together and have a certain intelligence to them, but they're very grounded. That's the inside of a myelinating glial cell, full of cranial fluid. It's not, people call that the myelin sheath, which has a very dry feel to it, but it's actually more cranial fluid than membrane. Here is the brain with the brain stem, and you've got the ventricles round it, the third ventricle in the middle, and the ventricle going down the spine. They're full of cranial fluid. This is the cerebellum at the back, and the face is here. So you don't have to remember these. I'm just giving you some images so you can feel your own brain. Also, you've got the spinal cord coming up, and then you have the brain stem inside, and then this expands out into the cerebrum above. And people think of a cut-off here as it joins the cranium, but the energy can travel up, then it changes mode here, then it changes mode as it goes up into the cerebrum. So I think that's enough for pictures, because we've looked at those quite a few times. What we'll do is we'll have a 10-minute break. Then when we come back, we'll go into that and we'll see how that activates the brain and the dream state, and how that relates through the roof of the mouth in a whole different energy system. So we're going to activate the roof of the mouth in a different way. We're going to start from the diaphragm. So the diaphragm drops, brings down the lungs, brings down the trachea, brings down the hyoid bone brings down the jaw, and the tongue is connected to the roof of the mouth, also connected to the hyoid bone. As that drops, the roof of the mouth drops. So there's a direct connection from the diaphragm to the roof of the mouth. Also, the stomach is under the diaphragm, so as the diaphragm drops, this is pulling down the esophagus, joins to the hyoid bone and the back of the trachea, and the tongue also pulls down the tongue and the roof of the mouth. So there's this direct connection, the diaphragm to the roof of the mouth and to the tongue. And when we work with the tongue in this way, this is what makes a connection to the brain. The tongue connects to the organs, connects to the brain, and people start going into the sleep mode. So if you start feeling yawny or sleepy, let that sleepy feeling, let that yawn go through your brain, and you'll find out that it isn't actually going to sleep. It's an energy that starts traveling through the brain and nurturing your brain. And it's nurturing your brain in a different way to how we normally experience the intellect. It's more the astrocyte cells, which are more to do with nature and a different way, a different type of intelligence than the intellect. So kind of knocks the intellect out a bit, and a different intelligence takes over, and there's this sleep mode there. So you may just stay awake, but if you feel sleepy, if you feel yawns, let them travel through the brain, and you'll find the brain starting to wake up. And we're going to activate the whole roof of the mouth from that perspective of the abdomen expanding and the diaphragm dropping. Okay, so closing your eyes,
I have a question for the, like when you start feeling the yawning coming, is it okay to just kind of let it out, or
Let it go through the brain.
but not kind of express it, go into the yawning?
Well, if you go into the yawning, you just go more and more into the yawning
Yeah.
generally. So you take that feeling of a yawn and that energy and you let it go through the brain, and it's as if all the little brain cells start yawning. They'll go like this, and they'll spread out and start breathing, and then that yawn, that's the transition into the
Okay.
into the glial cells breathing, and the energy is starting to move through the brain. So yeah, you take what would normally come as a yawn and be expressed externally and let it go internally as an energy through the brain. If you have to yawn, then fine, yawn. I don't want it to be a compressive type thing. You can go both ways, but if you allow it to, if it's comfortable enough to allow it to go through the brain, then you start going through a different mode, and the brain starts feeding and becoming more awake.
Okay, I know that. Thanks.
That's a play. Welcome aboard, by the way, Mathis.
Thank you. Sorry.
That's all right. That's okay. So,
Martin, Martin, can I just ask a question?
yeah,
So I had this strange sensation. It was as though my cranium was trembling.
was what?
And then it was as though my cranium was trembling.
Oh,
And later on, it felt like something was kind of almost making space in the middle,
yeah.
like putting the two sides apart.
Here, this, when you connect to the there's a direct connection in holographic breathing between the pelvic floor as a diaphragm and the roof of the head as a diaphragm. And when they start doing this, breathing in, breathing out, that activates the top of the head, and you can feel it all start adjusting here. So absolutely, yeah. No, that when you work with the pelvic floor, absolutely, it connects directly to the top of the head, energetically. Now, with yeah.
Question concerning the pelvis, do you suggest any particular way of sitting to make the movement more clear or perhaps more comfortable? I don't know, whether cross-legged or just sitting, or what's your experience in that?
I do it both. I do it lying down and I do it sitting. But what is going to help with that is what we're going to start talking about now. So you understand the dynamics of how the pelvic floor works within holographic breathing. I'm now going to start connecting us with the pelvic floor and how it works. Now, in the last webinar, it was pointed out to me that I have a different idea of how the pelvic floor moves to kind of science and everybody else. And with what I do, I very rarely look at anything else because it tends to pull me away from my experience. I just find out how the holographic breathing is working within myself and how it's energetically working without going around the internet to see how everybody else sees it. And it was pointed out to me that I see the pelvic floor rising and the diaphragm dropping down to it and the abdomen expanding. But within how it's generally taught, or to how to stimulate the pelvic floor, and I was surprised because I don't think they've got it correct. I think I've got it correct, but I am happy. I'm more than happy to be wrong. But what I'm going to do is, within the next bit, I will show you how it's described. I looked at some osteopathic websites, how it's described there, and within, I don't know about science, but I think it was for people to build up their pelvic floor. And which is diametrically opposite to how I describe it. I describe it as this: breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out, with the pelvic floor rising. It gives the diaphragm something to pull towards and something to relax away from. Now, the recording I saw on the internet, on the interweb, was that, so you can think of this as the base of the pelvis, this circle here, and the bit inside the cup is the pelvic floor. I know it's not exact, but it gives you a general idea. And these pieces of strings, you've got the muscles of the diaphragm. So the same as the cranium, as the muscles of the diaphragm pull down, the abdomen shortens top to bottom and expands to the sides. As the diaphragm rises, it lengthens top to bottom and narrows. Now, the description of it that I was reading, it may have been an osteopathic site, it may not have been, I'm not sure what it was. They were saying as the diaphragm pulls down, all of these muscles of the abdomen relax and they expand out, and the pelvic floor also relaxes and it drops, expands down. So their view was that as the diaphragm dropped, the pelvic floor also dropped. Then as the diaphragm rises, the pelvic floor rises. And to strengthen the pelvic floor, they suggested breathing out and let it relax, and then as you, breathing in and let it relax down, and as you breathe out, tighten the whole pelvic floor to build up the muscles. Now, in my mind, I don't know if they're just showing an exercise there for people to build up their pelvic diaphragm. I kind of doubt that is how it happens with our normal breath. For me, and how I experience it in hologram, and again, I'm happy to be wrong, and within holographic breathing, this is how it happens for me, that it is a diaphragm. So as this is pulling down, it is in holographic breathing, on the in-breath, all of the diaphragms are domed. The roof of the mouth, the tentorium in the brain, the diaphragm under the ribs, they're all domed, and on the in-breath they all flatten, and on the out-breath they all domed. And the pelvic floor for me is the diaphragm the other way up. Breathing in, it's flattening. Breathing out, it's doming. And for me, that strengthens the diaphragm, because what is happening with that, in a very relaxed way with every breath, rather than it just relaxing down and expanding, it's actually holding and tightening on the in-breath, then it's relaxing on the out-breath. And that is the same with pretty well all of the muscles in the body. Within holographic breathing, there's a shortening and widening on the in-breath, and then there's a lengthening and relaxing on the out-breath. So if you have that visualization when you're doing holographic breathing, and I'm going to allow you to do it both ways. In the meditation, we will do it both ways, how it's described on the internet and how I'm describing, and you can make your own minds up. I'm not going to force you to do anything, But if you do it in that way, that means in a very subtle way, every time you breathe in, the pelvic floor, the muscles are contracting slightly and then relaxing on the out breath. And that will build up the strength much more strongly in the pelvic floor than every so often really tightening it. Which, you know, when we breathe that, when in holographic breathing, I don't teach breathe in, then as you breathe out, tighten all the stomach muscles. You breathe out to a place where everything is relaxed. And to breathe out further, you have to tighten the stomach muscles. But I don't teach to do that. I just teach to breathe out to a balanced place, and then just breathe back in. But there is a tension. There is a tension within all of the muscles. There is this up to down tension. And the stomach muscles aren't just relaxing open. They are held in a tension already because they're holding in the organs. And then as the diaphragm drops, they mirror that. They expand at the same speed. But it's a holding opening. It isn't just a poof to this. It's the same with these muscles. As the jaw relaxes, they extend down as the jaw drops down. So they are opening, but they're not just relaxing wide open. They're moving in a balanced way. And for me, the pelvic floor is doing the same. Now, this whole motion, top to bottom through the body, and this is what they describe in holographic breathing. No, they describe in holographic breathing. What they describe in craniosacral therapy, osteopathy, or Sutherland used to describe is the brain and everything shortening on the in-breath and widening, everything lengthening. Now, we feel the expansion in our normal breath. We feel everything is expanding. We don't feel the shortening because it's contrary to our experience of breathing that things are contracting on the in-breath and would impede on your breath if you did that. But rather than feeling the muscles contracting, what you can do in holographic breathing, you can't, or I can't feel it with normal breathing, but in holographic breathing you can feel the shortening that is causing the opening. You can feel the lengthening that is allowing the contraction medially. And we can feel this with the pelvic floor. Now, my experience of this with the pelvic floor, when the pelvic floor is rising and the diaphragm is dropping, you get this, it's a bit like feeling of drawing a bow on the in-breath and then relaxing it until there's no tension on the out-breath. Drawing the bow on the in-breath and then relaxing it till there's no tension in the out-breath. And this is very similar to when I used to teach Tai Chi. Nothing was just a straight forwards. For the hand is going straight forwards and neck and head dropping back, coming back. And you get this all through the whole body, this feeling with every move. You're drawing a bow, then the bow is relaxing. And that is the experience I have in holographic breathing. And when you do it in this way, that they pull together on the in-breath, this creates an energy for me. And in particular with the pelvic floor is rising towards the diaphragm. It starts releasing an energy that travels through the whole body and instantly connects to the very top of the cranium. So I kind of look to the energies. So if I do it the other way round, where the pelvic floor is dropping down on the in-breath, that energy completely vanishes. There's no energy in it for me. And it actually feels like it's blowing out an energy, and this whole feeling of drawing a bow completely drops away. Now, there is kind of a relaxation to it, but it's not acting in the way that I perceive holographic breathing working. And also, holographic breathing is not the same as our normal breath, as we did in the first as we did in the last thing. So the diaphragm drops, the trachea drops, and because the jaw is dropping, they all drop together. And when we normally breathe, because the jaw isn't dropping, the trachea stays in the same place. It doesn't move, and it's fixed to the chest. So they open together and they close together. But in holographic breathing, the trachea is dropping, the chest is rising up around it, and on the out breath they're swapping over. This makes for a much deeper breath. And what we're going to do, and for me the same happens in the pelvic floor. And we're going to swap between. First of all, I'll start teaching you how to do that movement with the pelvic floor. And it's not a tightening of the pelvic floor, it's domed downwards, and it starts flattening on the in-breath, and then it domes down on the out-breath. You see the movement. You don't try and tighten the muscles. So we'll work with that, and then with holographic breathing, and then after a while I'll say, well, now try it as is described with our normal breath, that the diaphragm drops and the pelvic floor drops together and they rise together. Notice what that feels like. Notice what the energy feels like. And then we'll go back to doing it the holographic breathing way. And then after a while I'll ask you to bring your teeth together and leave them together, and that way you will drop into your normal way of breathing, because the jaw is not moving there. And if I just say, hold, don't move the jaw, people do, unless they've got something to fix it. So the teeth are gently connected. Then notice what happens. You can no longer do this movement of the pelvic floor anymore. It just drops away. Or for me, I can't engage in it anymore. But you can experience that for yourself. Now, there's also another thing in craniosacral therapy. You've got the sacrum coming down the back of the pelvis. So I'm going to stand up to do this. So you've got the sacrum, which is here, and the bottom of it, the pelvic floor, is coming into the sacrum and then coming around like this. Now, in the holographic breathing and in cranial osteopathy, on the in-breath, the sacrum is tucking under, and on the out-breath, the sacrum is rotating back. So breathing in, breathing out. So this mirrors my image of the pelvic floor rising. Breathing in, breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out. They just talk about it in the bones, but if you think of the pelvic floor also fitting into that, breathing in, breathing out. Now if you imagine the pelvic floor expanding down on the in-breath, it pushes the sacrum in completely the wrong direction on the in-breath. So it fits, the movement of the pelvic floor fits with cranial osteopathy, and it fits with how I experience holographic breathing. But we will swap between the two different modes, so you can have an experience of that for yourself, and feel that for yourself. And what I'm hoping now, the other thing that is important in this, you're getting a contraction top to bottom. Now, if you just focus on that without the stomach muscles expanding, you build up a lot of compression, which doesn't feel good. So it's important, as you get this contraction top to bottom, that at the same time you allow the whole abdomen to relax open. And that way, if you allow this to completely relax open, there's not a pressure, there's not so much of a pressure top to bottom. It's easy for them to do this because that is doing that. As soon as this relaxes open, then this becomes really easy. And then as this is coming in, then they work together. It's not one pulling down and making the other expand. It's they're both. This is expanding to enable that to come down, and this is coming down to enable that to expand. So I'm speaking quite fast, I'm sorry. It's just I'm kind of aware that I want to be able to give you a decent meditation, so I'm kind of speeding up my explanation of it. And for me, I think with people's pelvic floors, to the main part, the reason they're not working is because they're petrified. Is that in some way they've been traumatized and they've just become tense. So tensing them more isn't going to do much good. Actually teaching them how to breathe with every breath, then that whole area starts to breathe, the whole pelvis starts to breathe, all the muscles around the pelvis start to breathe. And for me, when I work with the pelvic floor in this way, especially around the back of the pelvis, I've had a lot of trauma there, that all starts relaxing. And my guess is that this would be really good for things like sciatica, because all of the nerves start relaxing and that whole area start relaxing. So for me, my guess is that for most people it's just become tight, and so this is dropping down, and it's kind of okay, it's working, because the muscles only have to be tighter than the pressure coming to them. And the other alternative is that they've lost all strength, and then they are doing, as described, how we're supposed to normal breathe. As this is coming down, the pelvic floor just balloons down. So that comes down, the pelvic floor balloons down, that rises, the pelvic floor rises with it, because it's lost all strength. Now that is just a theory, but certainly in my case, when I started working with it, it was just tight. I was barely breathing with my diaphragm, I was barely breathing with my pelvic floor. And when I learned how to breathe with my pelvic floor, the whole pelvis started releasing. The energies from the pelvis much more readily flowed through the whole body. There was a connection energetically from the pelvic floor to the top of the head. And as I say, when I go back to how it's described, because I tried it from the internet article, that completely stops. It completely disappears. So for me, it's not to build up those muscles in the pelvic floor. That will naturally happen. They'll get that natural elasticity back to them and tone back to them just by breathing with every breath. So that's my way of seeing it anyway. I can throw this balloon away now. Right.
Mark, may I say something?
Yeah.
So having just recently had a baby, I've done a lot of pelvic floor exercises. And I completely agree with what you're saying. There's a bit of a crisis apparently, and I know this from midwives, with lots of women before childbirth doing pelvic floor exercises, as you've described, tightening everything up on a sort of on an out breath, and there's been a phenomenon reported across hospitals of people's pelvic area just being far too tight to then give birth.
They're all
and too rigid.
They're already in spasm, and they're putting it more in spasm. For me, you know, I was horrified because I was listening to this radio program, because I think it's epidemic in our society. And I was listening to this radio program where they were talking about the pros and cons of smacking children. And the amount of people coming up and saying, that's what the buttocks are for, they're to slap, they're for slapping. That's where you slap your baby to teach it. That's why you have those big muscles there, as if that was the use for the buttocks. Now, that motion and that trauma into the buttocks at that age, for me, puts the pelvic diaphragm into spasm. And then that just stays as a memory. If it's repeated, that just stays tight, and that reflects in the pelvis. Now, as soon as you start getting it breathing, then it starts breathing in all the associated strains through the whole body. Now, I just want to, are people okay to stay for longer? Because this is for sure going to go for longer. Okay, good. I don't have to rush now. I've been trying to get it so that we can do it in time, but we're just not going to do it in time. So I've been talking twice as fast as I needed to be doing. So there is that, I think, from childhood chastisement. There is that from our sexuality. There is that from sexual abuse. So often that diaphragm, those organs, and just not understanding or knowing how to be with our sexuality, it all puts a strain into that area, and it just becomes tight. Now, tightening it further, for me, is really the wrong way to go. And my experience of this, if it is just gently lifting on the in-breath, and you don't have to do it, you just have to feel it, it's just rising on the in-breath, that is building up those muscles, because it's a tension up bottom to top, and then it's relaxing. So it is just gently tightening and gently relaxing with every breath, and that will build it up much more than trying to do these. I'm glad you described it, because I read it and I thought, that's horrific. That's a horrific thing to do to your pelvic diaphragm. That's you might try and build up some muscles, but you're just going to restrict the whole area. So it isn't how it works for me. I wish more women would come to holographic breathing and learn this for birth and pre-birth and for after they've given birth and breastfeeding, because I don't really actually know of anything that's associated breath-wise with birth in the way this is. So thank you, Amy. Great. Someone agrees with me. I don't have to feel like I'm being attacked by the whole of civilization thinks it should work this way, and I'm like, no, that's not right. Okay, good. So, any questions before we drop into the meditation? Okay, so that's the first time I've taught that, so I got no idea how people went with that, so it'd be great to know, to be honest. If anyone wants to give any feedback on that, it'd be great.
Yeah, I liked it. I much prefer your way.
Good.
And mainly because, as you say, the energies. If you do it the other way, the energy just stops. All the stuff that's happening energetically just stops. It's quite remarkable, really.
Who felt a big difference when they changed from normal breathing, from holographic breathing to normal breathing, or from how I was describing it to how it's normally described? Who noticed a big difference there? Yeah, everyone. Okay, brilliant. And how was it for you, Amy? Was that?
Well, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I was very struck by how, I mean, for me, it's an absolute revelation, because I have spent so much time with different people and different teachers looking at the pelvic floor and working with it. So I'm astonished, actually. And the thing I was most struck by was how much when doing it the way that you do with them bowing together, that movement, how much it released the base of my spine at the back. That's the coccyx, isn't it? Yeah, I could just feel such free movement of the coccyx.
And the whole, the way you're describing it's the whole sacrum.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. The whole sacrum. That's more. And also, I don't know if this is okay, but I also noticed my neck and head swaying more than usual. I was almost a bit worried, and there was so much to think about. I sort of lost the plot slightly at certain times. but anyway, that's what I noticed.
Brilliant, brilliant. It's great to get that feedback. Well, anyway, from what I can see, watching everybody, everyone seemed to get it, so I'm really pleased. If you practice that, you should find the whole pelvis start to relax.
Martin, in that last meditation, I had a really strong stuff happening in my head. And it started with the nose, the lower part of the nose, and round the back of the head, like at that level. And then after quite a long while, it moved up more around to the eyes and round that level, almost like a sort of circle that was moving up the head. But it was
well, really around the base of the nose and around back. That's the roof of the mouth, relating to the cranial base. You've got that circle there. Then the top of the eyes is the top of the diaphragm for the face, rolling back, relating to the tentorium through the middle of the brain. So that's the two sets of diaphragms through the face and brain.
Oh, that's what it felt like. I thought it seemed stupid, but it did feel like I did contact with more diaphragms.
Yeah, the roof of the mouth lines pretty well exactly with the cranial base, and the top of the eyes is another diaphragm, relates pretty well exactly with the tentorium through the center of the brain.
So would it be that they're waking up or something?
They're starting to breathe.
Stunning.
And the thing is, if the pelvic diaphragm is petrified or in spasm, then every diaphragm through the whole body becomes seized. And relating to birth, the ovaries and testes are more to do with the eyes, and they're the higher energies. The uterus is the center, is the nose and the heart energy. The cervix is the roof of the mouth, and then the lower mouth, it relates to the vagina. So the cervix relates directly to the roof of the mouth. So if you learn this type of breathing for giving birth, you have just a fantastic way of learning how to breathe with your cervix. So it very much is very helpful for birth, this type of learning, really. And for us, I mean, I think most people would have noticed what happens when you do your normal breathing and when you do holographic breathing. That whole, all the diaphragms and this whole drawing the bow just disappears when you go back to your normal breathing. Then as soon as the holographic breathing, it all kicks back into motion. It gives you a tremendous way of healing yourself. And as George says, it kind of grows on you. It just starts becoming your natural way of breathing.
So, and is it your view that we will eventually all have these different, like the fire energy, and so we will then use that to heal ourselves as well?
Well, we haven't got to the energies yet, but there's fire energy, there's a water energy, there's an earth energy. There are lots of different qualities of energy that come to life in holographic breathing, and we start working with those a bit later on down the line. They're very powerful. But this bit with the pelvic floor, for me, it is just changes the whole of holographic breathing. Once the pelvic floor starts breathing in that way, and you start accessing that, it gives a really deep and powerful grounding to the whole movement and energies of holographic breathing, and it gives a whole lot more meaning to releasing the potency that's held in the pelvis to move up through the whole body and to heal through everything. So it is an important one, this pelvic floor one, for sure. Not just for birth, but for our whole evolution, really. Yeah.